You're listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, a podcast from the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. I'm your host, Andy Moore. My guest today is John Pudner. John grew up in Richmond, Virginia as the eldest of 9 children in a very crowded 3-bedroom house. He attended a conservative Catholic high school with a fellow alumni named Steve Bannon, of whom you may have heard. John later attended Marquette University, where he received a bachelor's in political science and journalism. Now himself the father of 9 children, John has built a successful political and business career spanning more than 3 decades, based upon his skills in negotiating, diplomacy, and honestly getting things done on a shoestring budget. During his career, John has won 3 out of every 4 races in which he's been involved, including in 2014 when he was involved with Dave Bratt's campaign, who would ultimately unseat U.S. Majority Leader Eric Cantor in one of the most unprecedented upsets in political history. Later that same year, John also helped defeat a 32-year incumbent state senator in his home state of Alabama in the general election. John's, now famous strategy of outsmarting rather than outspending the opposition was born out of his hobby of extrapolating statistical data on sports teams. He's like the Moneyball of politics, I guess, is really how you could describe him. He's known as one of the go-to guys for helping upstart candidates who may not have the financial backing necessary to attract support from maybe the parties or other larger players in the political sphere. But through all of his successes, John has seen firsthand the role and the influence of money in politics, how it can manipulate the system, take advantage of loopholes that did not favor a transparent election, and one in which that only select major corporate donors and union bosses were often the true winners. With a desire to now reform the system rather than circumventing it, John now leads a team of fellow ex-political wonks at an organization called Take Back Our Republic, and they seek to change the very industry in which they all thrived. I'm excited to have him here today with us. Welcome to the program, John Pudner.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, John, I want to start with, as we do with all of our guests, your childhood and how you come to this work. I understand that I think your first job was as a paper boy, a newspaper delivery boy there in your hometown of Richmond. And from what I read, your paper route included a pretty diverse group of residents. It was like your family's house, the Catholic church where you attended school, a Jewish synagogue where your family voted, the center of Richmond's gay community, and the first block of a predominantly African-American neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's one heck of a paper route. Tell us a little bit about how that helped kind of shaped your understanding of the world and maybe, if it did, presented the beginnings of your political future.
That to 12 years old, be delivering newspapers to that group and got up to 550 customers at one point and just talking to people. And then a friend of ours, a close friend, ran for state senate, friend of the family. And they said, "Oh, do you want to knock on doors?" And I'm still 12. I'm already hitting my paper out. And so I delivered 800 letters from my dad on why they should vote for this guy. So I've knocked on doors in 8 states since then. I do like to stress the political in your info. I have realized recently, some people think I still run campaigns. I do not. I've dedicated myself to the reform effort. So just want to make sure everyone understands that. But it was just a grassroots, it's interesting with the divide right now in the country and people not talking to each other. Just from a data perspective, the leading indicator that you're a Democrat is how many people live in the density around you, and obviously vice versa. So if you knew nothing about race, ethnicity, anything else, you can plot most voters based on that. And obviously, I'm an exception to the rule there because we were in packed row houses, very packed in our house's case. And yet just came out a real conservative and for whatever reason, but always feeling like it was great dialogue with other people, never feeling like there were evil people in some other part of the country who were out to get me, because I was living amidst a lot of people who disagreed with me completely. And, we all got along.
That's funny. That's an interesting interesting a point, because I think often I say we as in Americans, right? We think in terms, probably too often, of this binary, us versus them. But when you ask people, like, who are the them, it's not the people in their neighborhood. It's not even often the ones in their state. It's the other that is faceless, that is nameless, that they're afraid of. But when you get the chance to meet your neighbors and to talk to them, you often find out you have more in common than you think.
Absolutely. And there is a country, rural, city, rural thing. There are other divisions. A lot of Thomas Jefferson fans celebrating the streets when that New Yorker Alexander Hamilton was shot and killed. That was celebrated in rural America at the time. So this isn't something new. But yeah, just to have the interactions and break it down, people talking to each other, and everyone, of course, the easy target now is social media. And that's true. There are just things that get going on social media, but it could be a tool that could really help too. I mean, what we're doing right now are other things. So just like, a lot of times been wasted in TV and made people, overweight and all sitting around with too much TV, but it's such an educational tool. So we have to look at the upside too and not get too down, and realize maybe if we can start to establish some of maybe just talking to people more freely, and everyone learning to Zoom and Google Meet last year, maybe that's a silver lining, that we start to break some barriers and talk to people who don't live right by us and think right by us.
That's right. Well, and I think it's interesting, using, as we are right now, some kind of virtual conference, right? Where you get to, not only do you see the person with whom you're meeting, but you get a little view into their life, right? So I can see like the basketball jersey on the wall behind you. You can see my vote banner and some of my bookcase behind me. And so I think it gives us a little bit of a glimpse into our friends, our family, our colleagues' lives that we might not have if we were just meeting at a coffee shop or even at an office.
Yeah, and just the other little things. How many of us now have seen a pet or a child run across the lap of someone who's in a meeting with us, which, I'm sure 2 years ago before COVID, we were, oh my God, is this person just not professional? But now it's commonplace. So yeah, to give that feel. I mean, there are people who like pets, or people who like kids, or people who don't want either. Want to avoid them all. But little things like that just shape, our priorities in life.
That's right. Well, and we realize that we're all humans, right? That we all have, even there's a classic video from CNN or one of the big news stations of the guy where his daughter came in through the door behind him, and he was having a very important, nationally broadcast interview, and all of a sudden a toddler comes in and her little walker, and his wife comes in to yank the kid out, and he maintains composure and keeps going. But you realize we're all fighting a difficult battle, and whatever it is, and we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
So, John, growing up, you mentioned your family friend that was running for state senate. Was politics important to your parents? Was it something that was discussed openly in your home?
They did. My dad was a contrarian, so he was very conservative through the 60s and even as a college professor. And as soon as I worked on Bush 2000, we won, Dad had turned complete left wing. So I just told Dad, you just hate whoever's in power. We have funny conversations, but he would go to Republican conventions, the state ones, old elections back then, the John Warners and people I had from Virginia. And, it was real conservative. And our church was very conservative, too. It was kind of traditional Catholic Benedictines, So that came out. But, yeah, we liked it. And I just, the first impression on TV, even the year before the state Senate friend race, was just Reagan's convention speech in 76. I wanted Reagan to beat Ford. So I didn't know how it all worked, but I'm an 11-year-old watching it like a sports game. And so got into it both kind of on the airways at the same time. We had a very local race. Just really neat 11 and 12-year-old to have both happen.
Yeah, that's funny. I was about that age when Ross Perot ran, and I also had no awareness of politics. But this guy was entertaining in a way the other two guys weren't. And so as a child, you're like, well, he's got this little stick he waves around. Tell me more about this guy. What's the deal? So that's funny. Well, so you went to college and obviously decided to pursue a course of study that was related. It was in political science and journalism. And I think, gosh, I mean, of two subject matters to be entangled then and now, those are, aside from politics and money, I think politics and journalism is the other one that fit hand in glove. Tell us a little bit about what prompted you to choose that as your major? What drove you towards that course of study?
Yeah, I had this. I love journalism. I mean, I still write all I can. But so I really went into journalism and added poli-sci. I was going to be a minor, and Marquette had a top 10 journalism school in the country, so that was a big draw. A couple influential people there, that just run into us in life. A Gail Perlick, who was a Wall Street Journal reporter, who's still there, was teaching, just taught me detail. And then George Reedy, who was really the first modern press secretary, was Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. I tried to, as a smart 18-year-old, take a shot at him on some question in class. And by the time he had sliced and diced me, I realized these guys who've handled the national press are way beyond where my 18-year-old smug, smart self is, or thinking I'm smart. Reedy took me under his wing. He said, I'm taking one Republican and one Democrat, and I'm mentoring them for 4 years. So that's just one of those moments in life. How do you handle the national press? How do you run a campaign? Because he'd done both, so he was the perfect combo. And his notes on how to run a campaign and how you have to build an army first of people who are really fired up before you talk about swing voters. I mean, the stuff he typed. I ran political campaigns for over a decade, still using his notes from those 4 years. I mean, even though he was 80 at the time, just one of those treasures. So that was it. My plan was go Marines, because everyone in Virginia who ran for office was a former Marine. I think the joke is, what are there 4 things that you always know within 10 minutes with someone? One's a Marine, a Harvard grad, a vegan, and I think there's one other one. So I was going to be a Marine. Do 10 years of journalism and politics, and Marines canceled my class. So I came out, grabbed a journalism job, and then George Allen was a young upcoming candidate, son of the coach in the town where I'd gone to work at the newspaper. So my journalism career was actually 6 months. My Marine career was 0. And suddenly I was running political campaigns. I was a 23-year-old and just kept winning. We had no money, and just that grassroots, it was so nice because we were the party out of power. The Republicans had less than a third, and just to figure out, okay, we're going to be outspent $200,000 to $40,000 back then. How do we win, and how do you do grassroots? And if you're in a rural area, where do you meet people? Where are the events? Where's the hardware store? Where are the gathering spots? So my whole campaign came from that perspective, not kind of from how do I do polling and media buys. I mean, I didn't run any polls on those early campaigns. We had no money for a poll. We had to go with gut and talk with people. So I'm just glad I came through politics that way, because it gave me, I think, what I think the election process can be if it's working right.
Sure. I one of my hobbies is woodworking. And when I was in college, I had a roommate who was a talented trim carpenter, couldn't manage his money to save his life, but he taught me a lot about just how to use hand tools. And when I'm stressed or things are difficult, I'm often out in my garage doing the same thing, using hand tools. And the adage is you can build all the same furniture with hand tools as you can with power tools. Power tools might make it faster and easier, but they don't necessarily make it more precise, right? You can just make mistakes faster and more expensively. And I think that is probably true with politics too, right? You can do polling, you can use, cutting edge data, and there's a point, a purpose to that that's very useful. But also, there's no replacement for just talking to as many people as you can, because if you talk to enough folks face to face, you've done a really in-depth quantitative and qualitative assessment of voter sentiment.
You so have. And this is, even now with partners in our nonpartisan work, this always seems a reoccurring little disagreement. The perception so much is you don't do any grassroots until you've gotten your message down behind the scenes. And to them, I just sometimes have to say, look, I ran a polling center for over 10 years. My polls were very accurate. Ran focus groups, a number of states, accurate. But if you saw the mess that goes into getting to your polling sample or getting your focus groups, you'd realize submerging yourself in the community and having people who really are with no agenda going, I want to hear what people are saying. And yes, of course, you're not filling all your boxes like you would in polling. Did I get the 27-year-old guy and the 58-year-old woman and everything else? But But if you're going in open-minded, realizing those things, like, okay, well, I just talked to a bunch of people who agreed with this, but they were all 25-year-old guys hanging out. Okay, that's one segment. So you said the quantitative versus qualitative. So I always like submerging first in the community before I ran a poll or focus group. I think it's people first, and then you can hone it with that instrument and find out, okay, exactly. I can tell this thing's fired people up and door to whatever. Let's measure precisely where we go, and then you get into your more precise measurements.
Yeah. So you started out doing journalism and kind of backed into politics. Now, a big part of your career has been based around data, right? And as I joked early on, the Moneyball side of politics. How did you get interested in data? Was that from journalism, like from a data journalism perspective, or was it really looking for tools to help you in the political sphere?
Yeah, so I always wanted to crunch. Now, I mean, I invent my little baseball game when I was 10 years old, percentages on baseball cards. So it was really a sports interest, and then New York Post was publishing my rating of baseball pitchers, like the early analytics. They had Bill James one week and me the other week. And obviously, James did much better, as far as that field, because he became the legend. Got like a friend of mine who was the quarterback for Alabama sitting at the table with Tom Brady before a bowl game and said, "What happened?" Tom took off. But so I always liked the numbers. But as I got into campaigns, when you're short on money, you don't want to send mail to every person. You've got the people who will never consider you, the people who would never vote for you. I just started building really what was kind of micro-targeting before that was a term. And they were like, "Wow, why does your mail only cost half of what theirs does?" It's like, well, they're people I don't want to remind to vote, or it's not worth the effort. Or so the data. And I have such a value in volunteers' time. If you want volunteers to hit doors, I just figured early on, you've got to do the data work first. Don't let them waste their time. Make sure they're working off a good list. And you can do a lot of this quickly now, just automatically. But at the time, it really took work because you were printing out sheets. And sometimes they'd say, "Why did I skip those houses?" I'm like, "Look, they're against us." For whatever reason, just go to them and calling first. And so just understanding the data. So I really was lucky when Fox News did the interview after Cantor. Gretchen started by saying, "Do you mind if I call you Mr. Moneyball for this interview?" So that was probably the easiest interview in history when they start on that note, but did get some accolades, and I've kept doing some sports stuff. That's my release. You go to the workshop, I run my sports numbers, for fun. And, but yeah, I just always thought if you combine data with grassroots, you have the two most important things to build on.
Yeah. Well, and so we've kind of talked around this, but coming at this from a perspective of someone who got involved and didn't have a lot of money, who had to find the smarter ways to do politics, eventually you came to see the role of money in politics not necessarily as a necessary force, but it's a force that was enabling sometimes for the wrong reasons. Tell us a little bit about that, and then if you want to go ahead and make the jump to how you arrived where you are today with Take Back Our Republic.
Yeah, I said it was just out of necessity that we figured out these other ways to do things without money. And the nice thing was, I just liked having some small donors, but no one big and a small budget, because I felt like the people I was electing didn't know anything. Now, once they get down there, you never know what happens. You start going to the lobbyist things and it can change, but at least to go in without just feeling like, oh my gosh, this one entity bankrolled me and now I'm going in as their legislator. I felt like it made it people. And I liked coming out of the convention system in Virginia, because you actually had to go county by county and win a nomination. It wasn't even a primary. Now there are downsides, obviously, to conventions, but nonetheless, you were at least having to talk to people. But that's what led to the jump. When I finally went back, I'd mainly done state legislative takeovers. So Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, 3 states I lived in. And, we took it over for Republicans in each one. And then went back for the Eric Cantor race. I just thought he'd lost touch with his district. He was on the national fundraising circuit, which, both sides have people who do that. He was a great fundraiser. But I kept talking to people. I was back in my home district, and I just found this professor, Dave Bratt, convinced him to run, a college professor. He wasn't sure. One day he calls, "Well, if you can flip back over to the house and convince my wife, I'll do it." And I said, "Sure." I can't be there for 8 hours. I didn't tell him that was because I was back in Alabama and I had to drive to Virginia. So, but coming out of that win and just seeing kind of the $5 million in the political industrial complex, and how it was just the polling and TV for Cantor, and us doing 200 people knocking on doors and very targeted, little digital with a small digit, with a small budget. We pulled it off, and everyone said, well, this proves you don't need money to win. I said, we really had a perfect storm, perfect candidate, perfect spouse, people fed up. I knew the district well. I had so much data from past conventions in the district. I said, this really is uphill to beat money now. And that's when I got a call from Mark McKinnon, who I'll say an old friend, but I didn't know him at the time. He'd done TV for Bush 2000 when I was doing his faith-based turnout nationally, and just was intrigued by the race. And we started talking about, should we form a group, a nonpartisan group, to just see if we can de-emphasize money. And that was it. It started as just money in politics, but, kind of a civil discourse, forget the specific issues, but is there some way we can get to a process that incents candidates to kind of run for the right reasons? No matter what your view on any particular issue, at least get to a setup where we've got functioning government again and just more responsive to people. So that's been the goal, and decided to hang it up, do Take Back Our Republic. I'd like to say it was the altruistic versus altruistic. I'd like, I had a bunch of people say, well, how could you quit politics on time? And here you are after 25 years, biggest win, your first ever national, always be in the scenes. But to be honest, I got like all these phone calls after that race saying, hey, you're the guy who can win races with no money. Well, I'm a candidate and I have no money. Can you work for me? And that's a terrible business model. So I wasn't sure that would actually work long-term for me as the no money guy, but it was a great move. I've loved nonpartisan. Politics is a grind. It's about to turn 50, and to really just be able to stay around it and around the system and still go to my RNC meetings and things, but not with a focus on candidates or particular race has been a great change for me.
Sure. Well, there's something to be said for still doing the type of work you love, but doing it in a way that you can sleep better at night, right? Like, and feel like I feel like your legacy is that you were trying to make the system more fair, more representative for all voters, right?
Yes.
So Take Back has, I think, 5 issues listed on the website as the issues that you all care about. 3 of those are money related, right? Dark money, campaign finance, and foreign contributions. Can you tell us about how each of those and how they're related?
Yeah, and I'd say the foreign donations are the biggest concern because those have to be secret because they're illegal. So you almost got to know there. That's dark money. But I just think so many ways have been set up to move foreign money in. And my gosh, with this terrible week we've had, without getting into politics of it, but obviously with Afghanistan and, the families hearing about, their soldiers today or yesterday, anything that has the potential that policy is being adjusted based on foreign interest is just so scary to me. And again, not to say accuse any elected official, but obviously no one wanted what happened this week, but just, were policies, really focused on what's best for the country. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. And is there money coming in from overseas? And that's why when we see something that seems like an opening for China or someplace to move money in, it's, look, I'm happy for China to argue their case over here for a different trade deal or whatever, but I'm not up for if their money's going in to help elect who wins. And whether or not that person knows, they may know it, or it could be a foreign entity just deciding this candidate's much better for my interests. So I'm not charging complicity, illegal complicity or anything, but we have laws against foreign donations. And yet I just feel like once you set up the dark money, and you can run everything through LLCs as opposed to a PAC that has to report, or, one of our pet peeves on the left is the way Act Blue runs money, or, these are all ways that we think make it easy to put foreign money into races. So I just put that at the top of the list. It gets a lot trickier with dark money because there are retribution issues. So if you're talking about American given, they're concerned about retribution. Those are a lot tougher. They're 2 sides of that issue, but the foreign money is the thing I think we have to hit.
Yeah. So my understanding of the way that foreign money arrives on our shores, right, and gets involved in the process is that what you said, they funnel it through shell companies or to organizations that don't have to disclose their donors. And then those organizations are the ones that make the buys or donate to candidates if they're allowed, or however it happens, right?
That's right. And I'll give an example. I always told people if I had to trade, limits on spending versus keeping it secret. I'd rather have it disclosed. And for some they disagree. I think there are half dozen or a little more states like Virginia and Alabama that I've worked in who have no limits, but it is full disclosure now. There's no more hiding and moving it around. And I just remember that first boss, George Allen, I wasn't working with him still, but he's running for governor, and Smithfield Foods had given him money, and a lot of liberal groups attacked him and said, because they were polluters. And ironically, they charged him with polluting the Pagan River. I'll never remember. It was just the funny thing that this river they were talking about, happened to be called the Pagan River, which, I guess religion and politics got everyone. And so they ended up having a press conference, and there was talk that Allen might return this check from Smithfield Foods. And he had a press conference at which he announced he'd gotten another check from them. And so whether or not you thought Smithfield Foods should be giving money or not, it was an issue. And I just felt like it was a fair issue. I mean, I liked Smithfield Foods. I thought they did good work. There were people on the left who didn't, just consider them a polluter. But it was a campaign issue. You could then vote on that. And that's why I just think if there's disclosure, I just want to know what you're voting on, what might be influencing you. And if that's all up front, great. But if it's money in the back door, you don't know why decisions are being made, I just think you're losing your representative government.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other issues that Take Back champions is anti-gerrymandering, right? So trying to do away with the process where, boundaries of a voting district are manipulated in order to benefit one party or the other. Knowing that you've been involved in Virginia, which I think for the last couple of years has been an excellent case study in a demonstration project, and how gerrymandering is not a partisan issue. It is a power issue, right? Where at some point in the last 5 years, both parties have been in power, and for at least part of the time opposed anti-gerrymandering efforts because they realized, oh, wait, we have some power here. Once it slipped away and the other side got it, suddenly their positions flipped. Tell me a little bit about where Take Back comes down on this and the type of change you guys would like to see.
Sure. We like nonpartisan commissions as long as you do them right. Now, they have been manipulated at times, so that's a longer discussion. And to your point on people changing sides on this, in 2010, after the North Carolina legislature flipped, you actually had a moment at which, a year or two later, more than 2/3 of all legislators had co-sponsored nonpartisan commissions. Of course, all of the Republicans had done it right up until they won. They then all dropped off, and all the Democrats got on board. And that's why Virginia was such poetic justice. And we didn't play any part in the referenda there. We did talk a little on legislation or meeting people, but one of my old clients, Emmett Hanger, who I elected to the state Senate for the first time and championed it for years as a Republican, it started to get momentum. We went into session. Suddenly the Democrats won, and there was just soul searching on would it still pass and would people stick with their vote. And it was a fight, to the credit to the ones who stayed on board. It was no longer the Democrats' interest. And some of them bailed for that reason, but others didn't. Others did, stick it out and voted. And so now you've got fair districts in Virginia. You've got the state that's had gotten pretty red, has gotten pretty blue. I'll say purplish because they've got probably an interesting race this year. It could go either way, perhaps. But if the Democrats had come in and gone from hard Republican districts to hard Democrat, of course, it would have been a huge swing. Now it's going to be a competitive House race this year. And, I don't know, I would guess Democrats win, but I don't know. Virginia is contrarian like my dad. Usually they like to go opposite the presidential winner from the year before. So I think Virginia is a great example of it happening. We did help in both the Ohio and Michigan redistricting. And let me say, I'm all for compromise. Michigan was an all-out. My Republican friends were mad at me for backing it. Didn't want it. Ohio, though, we managed to help get it and work out a compromise, which I really like. Some people say it didn't go far enough, but it had some power sharing. And you go into all the details. But we would always like it to be less partisan, whether that's moving to Ohio or whether it's all the way to Michigan. And the key on that, though, with the nonpartisan commissions, you have to have legitimately independent people. One problem liberals make is they think of professors as independent-minded, and Republicans do not. So when they start saying we have 3 professors on this, no offense to my academic friends, I think it has to be a jury selection, which I think Michigan did a little, where both sides can object, both can kick them off, and let's get to a real body that's not political and let them just draw lines. Everyone gets the basic they say, can't you just do the state on a grid and forget it? Well, you can't because of population distribution, but that's the idea. And it's tougher around cities. When you start to get in the weeds, you can always say contiguous counties. Yeah, it gets complicated. We get into suburbs and cities and how you divide them up. But just at least to have nonpartisan people looking at it. And the reason that ties to the overall message is if you have districts that are completely secure for one party, like most are now, then your whole body battles in the primary. I mean, the generals are irrelevant. And that's why we think you need nonpartisan to get the rest of the voters back interested or making a difference.
And so that then I think dovetails right into your support of instant runoff voting, right? Or a model that is deals with the fact that elections are so often decided in the primary.
Yes. And the reason I love instant runoff was all the Republican conventions I ran. So I ran 21 or it was a major part, I'll say 21 Republican convention nominations where there was no primary. The winner was whoever won the convention. As I mentioned before, grassroots all. Well, those really were instant runoffs. I mean, it took a day, but you'd have 9 candidates and they'd go there and you'd vote. You start eliminating the bottom one. And you came up with a consensus candidate. I think in only a third of them was the first place winner on the first ballot, the eventual winner, because it's the slash and burn, attacking everyone else, get to my 35%, and the others divide up 65%. All these people have attacked. The other 65% hate you. You have a nominee hated by 65%. And it just changes. It incents candidate behavior to go, I would see it as, I've got to be everyone's second choice. I mean, that was always my key. Even if I had a candidate who was getting in too late, was not going to be first say, hey, your whole model is every time you're told, sorry, Jen's my best friend. Great, I love Jen too. Can I be your second choice? And no one will say no the second time. Oh, well, actually, Mike's also my best friend. So there's a strategy, but more importantly, there's a consensus. And if you're going to be a flamethrower, you kill yourself in any kind of instant runoff system. So there are a number of variations on how you do instant runoff, but just as the basic model, arriving at a consensus candidate, I just think so much better. And by the way, that does not mean the most middle of the road candidate necessarily. I know you and I have talked on this, but I just keep going back to those 14 million, wherever it was, Bernie Sanders voters who voted for Trump. You can say far right and far left. To them, it was more important. They saw someone who wasn't a political insider. So I think some reformers make a mistake of saying, oh, we can get some middle of the road candidates. A lot of people don't like the mushy middle. It doesn't have to be that. It just has to be a consensus candidate.
Yeah. And it allows, I think this is why a number of Nanner members, right, are involved in instant runoff or ranked choice or whatever you want to call it, that it allows for better representation, right? You get a better participation, you get that consensus. And as you said, it changes the incentives that may be driving the candidates. And so, kind of what I hear from you, John, is that Take Back Our Republic is really interested in changing the incentives. If we change how money flows in and around politics, if we change how the lines are drawn, right, and so how people are elected, who their constituents are, and if we change the voting process, these 3 big structural changes could change the incentives behind our political system. Which my gut says that's the thing that a lot of voters bump on, is that we don't like the incentives. We are suspicious or incensed on what we perceive to be the incentives of politics today.
Absolutely. And I think that incentive word is so important. I just think political reform does carry some connotations. And don't get me wrong, most people use that form and they mean it the right way. But I think that just to say political incentives, political innovation, I mean, those are some key words, I think, to use that really set aside what we're doing. It's about how candidates work. Run. It's not about who wins a given race. Even though we talk about some ramifications for that. And that's why when we first came out talking, we talked about the political industrial complex that built around. That was kind of in our launch. And then, Catherine Gale has a great book that kind of walks through the same thing, how this political industry is built up. And so I think that terminology is so key. We want to incent the right behavior during campaigns, as I mentioned, but also after, once they're in elected office. Because as I said, I think it was Reagan who said, they talk about the swamp and they get here and they decide it's a sauna, so we need to keep them incented once they're elected to keep, being responsive to citizens.
That's right. One of my good friends from college worked for Senator Marco Rubio when he ran for Senate, when he was elected down in Florida the first time. And we had lunch shortly after the election. And I said, what do you say to a candidate? And my friend had worked in Texas politics for a long time, but I said, what do you tell a candidate like this the day after the election? And he said, as soon as the results are in and it's called, I pull him aside and I look him in the eye and I say, remember that you now represent everybody in your district, right? The ones who voted for you and the ones who voted for the other guy. Nice. Don't forget that. Go celebrate tonight, but remember tomorrow you are everyone's senator, ag commissioner, whatever. And that, it's been 10 to 12 years since then. And I think about that whenever I think about an elected official, and I wish, as a voter, right, just as a voter, I wish that sentiment was carried through more. And I wonder how much of that is directly tied to those incentives that people in the ruling class will say, how they perceive their role as politicians.
Absolutely. No, I think that's it. What do you come out of, and look at how partisan, races get, how not partisan, it's the wrong word, how within primaries, how vicious races are getting. So not partisan, but yeah, it starts there and goes straight through the general, and just got a problem we've got to fix. Yeah.
John, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for taking the time. This was great.
My guest today has been John Pudner, Executive Director of Take Back Our Republic. You can learn more about their organization at takeback.org. Thanks for listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic. This podcast is a program of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. For more information about our organization and how you can join, please visit our website at nonpartisanreformers.org.